Okay, guys, let's go ahead and get started with the very first React Native project that we're going to create. I am going to make it here in the terminal, and the command that we're going to run is react-native init, and then we're going to give it a project name. I'm going to call it my first project. As you can see, it's going to download a bunch of stuff, run a bunch of scripts. It's not really something that you necessarily need to know everything it's doing. So we're just going to go ahead and let it do its thing for a second here. As you can see, I didn't already have React installed, so it's gone ahead and installed React. React is, of course, separate from React Native, and I truly hope that you have at least a minimal understanding of what React itself is, because it will certainly help you get a better grasp of what we're doing here. Now, if you've installed Xcode already, then we can go ahead and run our project with React Native run-ios. Excuse me, first we need to cd into my first project. Now React-native run-ios. As you can see, it's building the project. It launches the simulator for us, and it's going to go ahead and build the app, push the app to the simulator, and then of course we'll see our app on screen. This could definitely take a minute, so I'll fast forward the video from here. The second window that popped up is the node packager, and its function is to transpile the JavaScript and JSX code that we write into a native language, Objective-C in this case, because we're working with iOS. Okay, as you can see, the build succeeded. It's installing the app to the device and now launching it. Now this loading bar up here shows you the progress of the transpiling, which again is done by the packager. That's why it matches what's in the terminal window. And this is your standard React Native hello world sort of boilerplate code that comes with your very first project. All right, so now that we've got the app running, let's take a quick look at what we've got here. You can see that there's sort of some instructions here that tell you a little bit about what you can do to get started. First of all, editing iOS or index.ios.js is how we'll start working with the code. We can reload this whole app with Command R. I'm going to hit that now. And as you can see, it reloaded from the local host. There are no module changes to be made, so it just displayed the same thing. And Command D or shake for the dev menu. This is the dev menu. Very, very useful, very important tool while debugging. I'm not going to go over all the options. I'll just go over the three that I use the most. I sometimes use reload. It's the same thing as Command R. But when you've been pushing Command D so many times, sometimes it's just natural to click Command D. Debug JS remotely is great if you don't want to use the Xcode debug window. If you use the Xcode output console debug window, whatever you want to call it, then you don't need to use this. You'll be able to see everything just fine. But if you prefer to use, say, Chrome, the Chrome developer tools or the Safari developer tools to see the output of the JavaScript, then that's what you use this for. And my favorite feature, enable live reload, which I'm going to go ahead and just turn on regardless. As you can see, it's on now. And what that's going to do is if I make any changes to the project, it's going to automatically reload it here on screen, so I don't have to Command R or Command D and hit reload. All right, so let's get started. And we're going to get started by opening up Atom or whatever your text/code editor is. And we're going to import the project folder for our React Native project. So file, add project folder. Then I'm just going to go to my desktop again and go through React Native projects. Just click the folder, click open. As you can see, everything that I need to work with is here on the left side. If you, like me, want the simulator to sort of stay on the front so that you can always see what's going on, click on the simulator, go to Window, and click Stay in Front. It's very simple. Now, we are going to open the file index.ios.js. And voila, here we have our very first, very, very basic React Native project. I know that some of this, possibly most of this, is confusing, and I assure you that by the end of the time that it takes for me to explain everything, you should have a thorough understanding. So let's start straight from the top here. It's important to know that this is all ES6, okay? So if you understand JavaScript but have no exposure to ES6, it might be beneficial to look into some other ES6 only tutorials. However, honestly, if you're pretty good at JavaScript, I really wouldn't worry about it. There's subtle changes. There are some great things about ES6, and I think you'll learn enough about them going through this. So the very first thing we're going to do is import React and component from the React package. The way that this works is that the string here inside of quotes refers to a package inside your node modules folder. So if we scroll all the way down here, we are going to find React. Right there it is. Okay, and the same thing for React-Native. We're going to find React-Native. So whenever we're importing something, we're importing whatever is before the from statement from whatever folder in the node modules folder that we've identified with single quotes. Now you might be wondering, okay, well that makes sense, but why is this set this way and why are these this way? Why is component, as it were, structured with these curly braces around it? Well, this is called destructuring in JavaScript ES6. And what it really means and how it works in depth, I will get into in a later video. Basically, destructuring is just a really nice way of pulling out only specific things that you want from a node module. React Native, for example, has something like, 50 components, but we don't want 50 components. We just need these 4 for the time being. So we're importing React and component from React. Now we're also importing the app registry, style sheet, text, and view from React Native. So the very first thing that is perhaps the most important thing when it comes to React Native projects is registering your app with the app registry. This call is only done one time for the entire application. It never has to be done again, as long as the code is still there, of course, but it must be done. Otherwise, the React packager will not know where your project is and thus will not be able to transcompile it to push to the iOS device simulator, Android device, or Android simulator. So it's obviously quite simple. We're going to call a function that is register component in the app registry, and we're going to pass it an anonymous function which just returns my first project, and also we're going to name the project my first project. This could theoretically be named whatever you want. All right, so starting up here, if you have an understanding of React.js, and like I said before, I hope you do, then you'll understand the component state, or the component as a whole. Every major component in your app or piece of your app will extend the React component, which is what we're saying here when we say extend component. And the reason that we do this is because we need all of the lifecycle management stuff that comes with React.js. If you don't know what those functions are, we'll get into them. But we're talking about things like component, did mount, and these are sort of functions that get called when these events occur. So if you say have jQuery and you know that document.ready is a thing, then component did mount is a very similar event that gets triggered automatically. You don't actually have to call component did mount. You can put code in here, and once component did mount gets called, then the code will be shown. So let's go ahead and put an alert in here of, say, test, and we will save it. And you'll see that the app went ahead and reloaded all by itself. I didn't have to do anything. And now once the component did mount, event was called, alert test showed up. So very, very simple. They're not complicated. There are a couple of them, and we'll go over them in time. But there's component did mount, and component will unmount will be the ones that we'll work with mostly. Component did mount is called after the component finishes mounting, and component will unmount is called before the component is officially, if you will, unmounted. But enough about these sort of components, or sorry, I should say component events. Let's talk about what is undoubtedly the most important function inside of a component. That is the render function. Okay, the render function must always return either null or a valid set of JSX. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and just put nothing in here, and as you can see, it specifically says a valid React element, which is typically composed of JSX, or null. So if I were to just go ahead and return null, that would be fine. Okay, it's not going to show anything, but that would still be fine. Now we're going to go ahead and put back what we already had, and as you can see, enable live reload is doing its job, and it's working. Before we get into what the actual JSX is, let's go down here and look at our styles. So const is a JavaScript variable type. You guys should all be well aware of it. It's a variable. It's just like a var in JavaScript, except it's not meant to change after runtime. Okay, so we're going to call the create method from the style sheet component that was pulled from React Native, and we're going to pass it an object of styles. Now, React Native styles are very, very similar to CSS. The major difference is that there are no dashes. So as you can see, typically it might be align dash items or background dash color. Instead, it uses camel case, and it is a rather limited subset of CSS. So while sort of like the core styles that you would typically use are there, not all of the styles that you would use in CSS are there. And of course, we'll get into how all of them work in a little bit. But let's just move back up here to the return portion of the render function. So the return portion of the render function inside our component. As I stated earlier, it must either return null or some amount of JSX. In this case, our render function by default returns a view with a couple of text elements inside of them. These elements, text and view, are actually just components that come prepackaged in React Native. And each one of these components that come prepackaged with React Native have their own function. Obviously, text is used for displaying text. A view, for those of you that have any sort of iOS development experience, a view is just like a view controller in Objective-C or Swift, really. So the view tag really will just generate a view in iOS. Now, the return function, the return portion of the render method in all of your components must always return a single level JSX element. What do I mean by that? Well, you see I've got view and then a bunch of stuff inside that view. That's totally fine. But what I cannot do here is do another view with some more text saying, meow or something like really, really cool stuff that people say, because it says that adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. So I can only return a single level of JSX. Now, to remedy this situation, I can wrap all of this into one top level view and refresh it, and voila. Now you'll see that the text up there is somewhat messed up, and that's okay. The reason that these things happen is just the way that the devices are set up. 00 essentially for an iPhone is in the top right or top left hand corner, so that's why it looks like that. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but when the red screen came up, the error page, let me go ahead and just get that again for you. I can't just save my file here and have this reload. When you have these fatal errors, the only way to bring the code back is to go back to the app and either Command R or Command D and hit reload, or just simply click reload.js down here. Okay, so let's close this view tag, save it, come back, reload it, voila, we're back to where we were. Awesome. Now the last thing I want to talk about before we move on is what's inside most of these components. It's a style property, and what we're passing to that style property is an object of styles.container. This can be somewhat confusing, so let me sort of break it down for you. When we're passing things to React Native that we want to be pure JavaScript, we must always surround it in curly braces, okay? So anything in between these curly braces is understood to be JavaScript. So if I didn't actually want to pass styles.container and I wanted to actually pass styles, I would have to pass an object inside of these JavaScript curly brace tags. I get it, it's confusing, but basically that means I would need to make another set of curly braces once again so that it can be an object, and then go through and write my my style code here. Let me just go back up here, do background color, and we will change the background color to some random number, and as you can see it changes to this very dark gray. And what we're doing, like I said, is we are passing an object, sort of an independent anonymous object if you will, into the style property. If I were to remove this extra set of curly braces and reload, it would be confused. It's like, all right, what are you doing? What's going on here? I just don't understand. I understand that everything between these curly braces is JavaScript. This looks like CSS. What's going on here? Okay? Now I know what you're thinking. Jesus, enough talk. Let's just write some code. So in the next video, we're going to talk about what we're going to make as our very first project, and then we're going to get coding. Let's do this, guys. I'm ready.